think we left off around here with this idea that plant roots have challenges of getting access to minerals all by themselves if the minerals are attached, bound to the soil particles. And so soil particles have a net negative charge, which means the cations, the positively charged ions that the plants need, will be bound to those soil particles. And they have a hard time getting those available. When we say available, what we mean is that the minerals need to be dissolved into the water. So somehow they have to get off of the soil particles and then dissolved into the soil water. Once that happens, the plant roots can take them up. So, excuse me, there's two ways that we see this happening. It's the cation exchange process we got into a little bit, so I'll wrap into that next. And then we also have to think about fungi and bacteria and their roles in helping the plant get access. So this idea of cation exchange, we talked about a little bit already. I believe this is where we left off, where you have these minerals bound, these cations bound to the soil particles, and they, chemists have figured out which ones have higher binding affinity for these negative charges, which ones have lower binding affinity. And so you can look up these lyotropic series and they'll kind of map it out for you. So I've given an example here. So anything to the left has higher binding affinity, and as you work your way toward the right in that series, you have lower binding affinity, which means sodium is pretty easy to knock off of the mineral. And so protons, you can see their H plus are pretty good. They can knock off calcium, they can knock off magnesium, potassium, ammonium, sodium. So everything to the right of proton, the proton has the ability to replace. And so that cation exchange idea. And the good thing about that is that there are good sources of protons, H plus, in the soil. And when roots are busy living their life and going through respiration, they give off CO2 in their respiration, similar to how we do it, but they will give off CO2, and when that CO2 reacts with water in the soil, it forms, one of the products are protons. And so there can be a pretty decent source of protons around the plant roots, which is good because then it can allow for cation exchange. So that's just one example of how cation exchange can happen. Soil is extremely complex. There's other mechanisms where you can see that cation exchange happening besides just with protons. So that is definitely in play around the plant root and can help get those cations, those minerals into the water, and then the plant can take them up. So they've looked at, okay, what do plants need? They've figured out all the macronutrients and the micronutrients that the plants are getting. And with the minerals, the different minerals that the plants need, there's some that they need in higher levels and some that they need in lower amounts, but they're still really important. And then they started looking at, well, when we look at soil systems, what else can impact the availability of these minerals besides this cation exchange idea? And a huge thing to think about is soil pH. And so soil pH really has pretty good influence on how these minerals will be available to the plant. And so I like this diagram. I think it's pretty nicely laid out here. So if you look on the bottom, that on the x-axis, that is showing the pH. And if you look at the range of, if I can draw this without shaking too much, just finished my coffee. So pH 5.5 to 6.5. And follow that range up with all these different minerals. You can see how fat the lines up. And then you can see, for example, boron is really key when it's around, 7 really nicely available. And so this is just a nice demonstration showing that, yeah, roughly pH 5.5 to 6.5 is where we see nice availability. And when they started measuring the soil pH of a bunch of different soil systems, most of them fall into this range of 5.5 to 6.5. There are some definite exemptions to that. But in general, and a lot of this we have to remember is thinking more, I mean, a lot of agricultural soils are looked at because we care about food production, of course, feeding all the humans. So, you know, a lot of that data is including commercial crop, you know, agricultural fields. So going back to basic chemistry, when you look at the pH of a system, the definition of pH is the negative log of the hydrogen ion concentration. So brackets, that means concentration. So pH is equal to the negative log of the hydrogen ion concentration, okay, which is a cation, H+. And so when the minerals, when we say in that 5.5 to 6.5 range, the minerals are more available, which means that they're more soluble in the water, in the soil. They're just in that range. It seems like it's easier to see the, you know, pretty good amount of minerals solubilized or dissolved in the water system. So this is another factor that you have to think about when you're looking at mineral availability in the soil. And of course, if you grow plants in a more contained, like potted systems or in an indoor system, that type of parameter you can pretty easily adjust yourself if you want to. And so you can have a better control on pH levels in a smaller system like that. But even in, you know, bigger soil systems, egg soils, for example, there's a lot of things that you can do to adjust the pH if you need to. And so sometimes soil systems need a little bit of adjustment to try to get them more into that range, and you can do that. So this pH range, 5.5 to 6.5, it's slightly acidic. One thing you need to be aware of is that fungi are more prevalent in slightly acidic soil systems. They're more prevalent. Now that can be kind of a double-edged sword because beneficial fungi are happy at slight acidic conditions, but so are all the pathogenic fungi. And I think I mentioned the other day, when you rank out what types of organisms attack plants and cause disease, fungi win. There's more fungal pathogens out there than there are bacterial pathogens, viral pathogens. And so there's a lot of bad guys when it comes to fungi. However, there's a bunch of good guys too. And so this slight acidic condition does tend to favor fungi. They're happy in those conditions. Okay, so you can see the list here of the different minerals that the plant needs. And usually, you know, if you go to the store and you buy some inorganic fertilizer, you know, Miracle-Gro or something like that, it's usually nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So the top three is what they usually contain in those bottles. So NPK, and it depends on which one you buy, but that's the most common strategy that they'll focus on those, which is, you know, fine because they're needed in high amounts. Those are macronutrients. But you know, you can see that there's more to this than just NPK. And so you need to think about, you know, when you're growing plants, you need to be able to provide a habitat where they have access to these types of other minerals rather than just NPK. And so a good soil system, something beneficial fungi and bacteria in there is a really good strategy. So I said, when we look at cation exchange and microbes, those are like the two things when we think about. pH is also a factor, but that's, I guess, kind of wrapped into cation exchange in a lot of ways. They kind of talk about it in that realm. But okay, so microbes, I want to talk a little bit about the microbe idea. And so We already talked about mycorrhizal fungi. So they are huge. They're huge for helping the plant get access to these minerals because fungi have all kinds of cool enzymes and they secrete all kinds of chemicals that can help get the minerals attached to the soil off of the soil particles and into solution. And so you'll hear people talk about weathering microbes, weathering like the weather system. They'll talk about microbes can weather the rocks. And what they mean by that is that they are capable of breaking down and getting the minerals off of the soil. So this is a really nice image of a root system. And with the arrow, you can see the roots or the larger, and then all the fine, delicate looking fungal hyphae coming off of the roots. You have to imagine that all into the soil system now. And I made a little note there, note the difference between the diameter. And so if you're a plant and you form this relationship with this fungus, one huge benefit that you get is that the fungal hyphae is so much smaller in diameter. And so that's the fungal hyphae, that's not your root system. So you feed the fungi, but then they produce all these wonderful petite hyphae that are much smaller than any root that the plant can make. And so that allows the plant to get access to water and minerals in the little tiny cracks and crevices of the soil that the plant roots just physically cannot get to because they're too big. All right, so the fungal hyphae, that's a definite advantage to the plant that they're very petite in that way and can get into little tiny cracks and crevices of the soil. So fungi, mycorrhizal fungi are incredibly important, not only to get access to water that the plant can't get direct access to, but also minerals, and then just their ability to release all kinds of interesting enzymes and chemicals to get those minerals off of the soil particle and into the water system. Why don't we do a eye clicker? Let's see if I can jog your memory on this one. It's not the only way that we see is happening. So mycorrhizal fungi definitely important, but bacteria too. And so this is taken from a published paper where they were zooming in on bacteria. They ignore the fungi, but fungi can do all of this too. It's just that the scientists were examining what bacteria can do. So over here on the far right, this is the plant root. And you can see that it's doing some things too. It is releasing certain chemicals and it's capable of, these dotted lines are saying that it's capable of producing things that can feed the bacteria. Okay, so you got that going on. And then you can see that you have the bacteria. You can see all these black lines coming off the bacteria. So they're trying to say that bacteria have a lot of options, a lot of strategies to get these minerals, get the cations off of the minerals. Okay, and then they're showing that the plants can then take those up. So the presence of these bacteria and fungi are in and of themselves, microbes are helping release those cations off the soil, but they're also creating an environment that is very healthy for the plant roots because the bacteria can release these white lines up top. The bacteria and fungi can also release other chemicals that can directly help the plant, like help it defend itself, protect itself, or give the plant some nutrients, other nutrients that it can use and help create a healthy system. So it's almost like preventative medicine in a way. If you have a soil system that is really rich in beneficial microbes, you are essentially allowing that plant to optimize its health. It's like preventative care. You don't wait for the plant to get sick and then try to figure it out and save it. If you can create an environment where that plant has a healthy start and a healthy environment through its life, then hopefully you'll reap the benefit of that. And so all of these bacteria and fungi, these so-called beneficial microbes that they talk are doing many, many things for the plant. And right now we're focusing on the idea that they can release minerals off of the soil particles so that the plant has an easier time. So this is why there's, and I'm just thrilled to see that there's this big interest and push to figure out how to create healthy soil environments for plants. People are really starting to embrace the idea that you need beneficial microbes. They talk about living soils, organic amendments and all of that to help improve the microbial population and get the beneficial microbes in. So unfortunately, a lot of our agricultural soils are not super healthy when it comes to the microbes in the soil. What a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the inorganic chemicals, as well as the pesticides that get sprayed on the plants and then that ends up in the soil system, even the inorganic nutrients can be detrimental to the bacteria. It actually can kill them off, not just the pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and all of those. And so if you study agricultural soils and look at their microbial populations, they tend to be not so good. They actually use the phrase a microbial desert. And so they're starting to recognize finally that microbes in agricultural soils are super important and that you can't just ignore that and spray whatever the heck you want to spray on those plants and in the soil. It does have some very negative consequences. Here's an interesting published paper thinking about both fungi and bacteria and their role of helping solubilize phosphorus. And so here, this is a really cool experiment where they were showing that the fungal hyphae was like a highway system, that the bacteria could essentially skate alongside or on the top of and get to these patches in the soil of high phosphorus, where then the bacteria and the fungi can break down phosphorus. And so the idea here with phosphorus, if you think about especially agricultural soil systems, probably phosphorus is the most challenging mineral for the plant to get adequate amounts of that. Phosphorus can be present in your soil. Like if you take a soil sample and send it off to have it analyzed, they may say, oh yeah, you have phosphorus in your soil, but now most soil testing places will tell you how much phosphorus is found and how much is available. And the problem is a lot of phosphorus can be in your soil, but it's bound or precipitated, which means the plant can't have easy access to it. And so that's actually probably of all the minerals, that's the one that can be very troublesome for growers to make sure that their plant is getting enough of. And so microbes are the key here. If you can get microbes doing their thing, let's see if I can get this to, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and see if I can get this to show. Here. Okay, so here's the actual YouTube video of this. So this is Pseudomonas putida bacteria, which is really common in the soil. You can find that species of Pseudomonas. And so what happens is there's like this biofilm liquid layer covering the fungal hyphae. And you'll see the Pseudomonas just kind of skating along the hyphae. And this is on an auger, so it's a little artificial. In order to capture the image, they grew it on an auger plate. But This is real time. So they're speeding. They're going fast. That's real time movement. Those bacteria are moving really fast. They're just skating along the surface. Pseudomonas is that rod shape. There's many of them, that rod shaped cell. Isn't that cool? So that's going on in the soil, probably with all kinds of different bacteria. They're partnering up. And what's so cool about this is that they realize the fungus is feeding the bacteria so it can keep moving, because it takes energy to move. You know, to be modal, it takes energy. Pseudomonas use flagella, and that takes energy to get the flagella to move. And so they actually found the fungus is excreting nutrients that Pseudomonas can use so it can keep moving to get to the phosphorus patch, break down the phosphorus, and then the plant can get access to that. So it's this really cool kind of three-part thing. You got the plant, you got the associated fungus, and then the bacteria that are using the fungal highway system, essentially. So that was a huge kind of interesting find that was published not too long ago. And I think they're going to find more and more of this kind of thing where you have the fungus and the associated microbes around kind of teaming up to coordinate their efforts. And so let me go back to here. Oh, wait, let me go back to here. Okay, so this idea of you know, the microbes in the soil helping the plant get access to these minerals. So you got cation exchange, pH certainly plays an influence on it, and now the microbe idea. And so with all of those in motion and acting, you can get, you know, the plant can get adequate access to the minerals as long as there's minerals in the soil to get access to. And so this idea of the fungal hyphae growing in the soil system, getting access to nutrients, they're now finding really interesting research that these fungal networks are throughout the whole forested ecosystem that they've been studying. So many people have been looking around the world at different natural systems and asking the question, you know, are these trees and plants living solitary lives in these forests or not? And it's the mycorrhizal fungi that are really connecting them and helping them communicate and exchange nutrients. And so this idea of, you know, I don't know about you, but before I took any advanced science classes when I was younger, I remember hiking through the woods all the time and seeing these, you know, I love white pine trees. And then I'd see like this, the younger seedlings, you know, like a couple years old. And they're like, you know, about as tall as me. And I'm thinking, okay, they're getting almost totally shaded out, and yet they're green and healthy, and they keep growing year after year. How is that possible when they are so shaded and they need pretty decent light for photosynthesis? Well, now they realize the mother trees nearby, so to speak, can actually feed the smaller trees and give them a leg up in terms of nutrition. So, you know, as they grow, eventually they'll be able to do it themselves. But you can see the flow of nutrients going from tree to tree to tree, and it's through the fungal network connecting all of the root systems. And so Dr. Suzanne Simard, who is out in Vancouver, was probably the pioneering scientist that really broke open this field of study. And again, it was so fantastic of a story that initially they didn't quite believe it. And so it took a lot of research on her part and publications for this idea to be accepted more widely. Yes, that was what was really bothering people. They're like, no, you know, because I don't know about you, but when I was in undergrad school, it was always like survival of the fittest, kill or be killed. If you're different species, you're going to be fighting with each other all the time, fighting over resources. And they're actually finding, Suzanne Simard was actually finding in a study she did out in British Columbia, she was studying Douglas fir trees and paper birches. And she was finding that they share nutrients and they kind of take turns. So at different parts of the growing season, especially when the paper birches are well leafed out, they can tend to shade the Douglas firs. And so the paper birches were feeding the Douglas firs extra sugar. And then later, when the paper birches were, not doing as much photosynthesis, the Douglas fir would take over and return the favor. And so, very different species, and yet they are sharing resources and communicating. So she's done a lot of really cool work looking at this idea, and she jokes that movie Avatar with the mother tree, she says, oh, they're talking about my research, because there is some analogies there. So that top, these are snippets of published paper. So Suzanne Simard, that's a pretty catchy title. Mycorrhizal networks facilitate tree communication, learning, and memory. So I talk about this paper in my advanced botany class because she's not the only one saying this. There's many other scientists who would agree that trees, plants can learn and they do have memory. And so, she's located in Canada. And here's a couple of other snippets that I took of papers. Socialism in soil, the importance of mycorrhizal fungal networks for facilitation in natural ecosystems. And so this idea of an underground network and the mycorrhizal fungi that are facilitating all of that. So very, very interesting research. Which reminds me, I have posted in the readings and videos a few short readings dealing with mycorrhizal fungi and primarily forested systems. And I'm going to create an assignment for you to do. These readings are very short. This is taken from the book, The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. Some of you may have heard of that or read it already, but there's some selected chapters I'll be posting now. And the ones I've posted are of mycorrhizal fungi and forested systems. So they're really quick reads, very interesting. He's got a very delightful way of writing. And I will post an assignment on what I want you to do with those readings. Okay, so I'm working on that. I will get that posted soon. All right, so fungi, incredibly important to plants. So we also need to think about how fungi can interact with other organisms and form a very interesting symbiotic relationship. So lichens are an example of this, where we see, instead of plants directly, we see algae. And CB is cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria, remember, I think I may have mentioned cyanobacteria are cool, IA on the end. Cyanobacteria are cool because they can do photosynthesis, all right? And so they do photosynthesis very, very similarly to algae. And so with this lichen relationship, we see that fungi hang out with either algae or they hang out with cyanobacteria, or it can be all three. And of course, the algae and cyanobacteria are busy making sugars. And then the fungus is actually providing physical protection, like a home for the algae and cyanobacteria. They can provide all kinds of minerals because they're busy getting minerals off of rocks and soil particles. They can provide growth factors that help just overall help the algae and cyanobacteria thrive. And so it's this partnership. And they also have recently found that some lichens also contain an additional partner, which are yeast. And yeast are fungi, but yeast they grow unicellularly, so they look like ovoid cells under the microscope. They're not filamentous. And so when we look at the typical fungal lichen, it's a filamentous, they form the hyphae. But now we know that yeast hang out there too. So there's an additional partner in this relationship. And so what you're seeing in this image on the lower left is all the green that you're looking at there. That's all fungal hyphae. And then ignore the very top red, like the very top part here. All of these little red dots that are interspersed in the hyphae, those are the algal cells, or they can be the cyanobacterial cells too. And then all that red at the very top, that's just the area where the fungus is forming some spores. Okay, so that's all fungus stuff up there. And then when you look at this lichen relationship with the naked eye, you would see, these types of organisms on rocks or tree trunks, concrete, they grow everywhere. All right, so when they grow separately, they look very different. You put them together in this relationship and they morph into these beautiful lichen growth forms. And so very, very interesting interaction and something that's been heavily studied. If you study lichen, you're a lichenologist, which there are some very famous ones that have done some great work here in the United States. So, all right, so we're going to learn a little bit more about lichens, but I'd like to stop there. We'll continue on with lichens on Monday, but let me stop. Let's go over the exam 2.